At 4:56 p.m. on July 18, 1943, Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Becker watches the engine temperature needle climb past the red line. The cockpit smells wrong. Hot oil, burnt metal, something electrical. 30 seconds earlier, his Messerschmitt Bf 109 was still climbing, spiraling above the Bavarian countryside after a defensive scramble. Now, the Daimler-Benz DB 605 engine is shaking itself apart in front of him. Becker throttles back. The vibration worsens. A cooling line has ruptured, probably from debris kicked up during takeoff. Without coolant, the engine will seize. When it does, the propeller will lock, and the aircraft will pitch violently forward. At low altitude, that means one outcome. He glances outside. Below him, green fields, scattered farmhouses, and a thin line of forest. No friendly airfield in sight. No altitude to trade. No time to troubleshoot. The engine coughs once, then again. Becker makes the decision before the engine makes it for him. He lowers the nose, lines up with a long stretch of grass, and prepares to crash land. The landing is brutal. The left wheel digs in first, the aircraft slews sideways. The right wingtip clips the ground and snaps back. The canopy shatters. Dirt and grass explode into the cockpit. Becker's helmet slams forward. His vision whites out for a second. Then, silence. He is alive. The fighter is not. The Bf 109 lies broken in the field, nose buried, tail twisted, one wing folded like a dead bird's. Smoke curls from the cowling. Fuel drips onto the grass. Becker unbuckles, climbs out, and runs. He knows the rule. Pilots who linger near a downed aircraft get captured by their own people, interrogated, blamed, reassigned, or worse. In 1943, the Luftwaffe is no longer forgiving. Aircraft are scarce. Experienced pilots are scarcer. A mechanical failure on takeoff is not heroic. It is suspicious. Becker disappears into the tree line just as a truck appears on the road nearby. By nightfall, the wrecked fighter will be reported. The engine will be examined. The paperwork will begin. But Becker has no intention of being present when it does. Karl-Heinz Becker is not supposed to survive what comes next. According to Luftwaffe procedure, a pilot who crashes behind friendly lines waits for recovery. He is collected. He is questioned. He flies again if he is lucky. Becker is about to break procedure, not because he is reckless, because he understands something about how systems fail and how to escape them. Karl-Heinz Becker was born on February 11, 1919, in Augsburg, Germany. His father was a machinist. His mother worked in a textile mill. Becker grew up around engines, belts, pulleys, metal shavings, and grease-stained hands. He learned early that machines are not obedient. They do exactly what physics allows them to do, not what people expect. At 16, Becker apprenticed in an automotive workshop. At 18, he joined the Luftwaffe as a mechanic, not a pilot. He spent 2 years working on engines before ever touching a control stick. That mattered. When he finally entered flight training in 1941, Becker already knew how aircraft failed. He could hear problems before instruments registered them. He could feel imbalance through vibration. He did not trust gauges blindly. His instructors noticed something else. Becker did not panic when procedures broke down. He treated emergencies as mechanical puzzles. That made him dangerous in the air and difficult on the ground. By 1943, Becker is a lieutenant assigned to a Reich defense unit responsible for scrambling interceptors against Allied bombers. The missions are short, violent, and unforgiving. Engines are pushed hard, maintenance cycles are rushed, failures are common. The Luftwaffe's doctrine emphasizes obedience and discipline. Becker believes discipline matters, but he also believes machines do not care about doctrine. The field where Becker crash-landed sits 8 kilometers south of a secondary Luftwaffe maintenance complex. He knows this because he has worked there. Before he was reassigned to flight duty, Becker spent 3 months at that complex assisting with engine overhauls. He remembers the layout, the hangars, the perimeter fencing, the fuel storage. More importantly, he remembers what aircraft are kept there. Not frontline interceptors, not operational squadrons, but aircraft in transition, tested, fueled, maintained, sometimes ready, sometimes forgotten. Becker reaches the forest edge as night settles in. He stops moving, listens. No pursuit, no shouting, no dogs. The crash happened close enough to base that ground crews will assume he survived and will be recovered in the morning. There is no urgency yet. That gives him time. Becker counts what he has. No radio, no maps, no food. A flare pistol with 2 cartridges. A survival knife. A flight suit torn at the knee and smeared with oil. What he has instead is information. He knows the hangar complex runs a skeleton night crew. He knows the guard shifts. He knows the engines they service. He knows which hangars are locked and which are not. And he knows something else. If he allows himself to be recovered officially, he will never fly combat again. The Luftwaffe is losing pilots faster than it can replace them, but it is losing aircraft even faster. A pilot who crashes on takeoff and walks away becomes a liability. Becker does not intend to be grounded. If his war is going to end, it will not end on paper. He moves after midnight, staying in the trees, avoiding roads, keeping the stars at his left shoulder. The maintenance complex appears gradually, lights dimmed, silhouettes of hangars against the horizon. He stops again, watches. A truck idles near one building. 2 mechanics smoke cigarettes. Their rifles lean against the wall. They look bored. That is good. Bored men miss things. Becker waits until the truck drives off, then crosses the open ground at a jog. He reaches the first hangar door and slips inside. The smell hits him immediately. Fuel, oil, rubber, cold metal, aircraft smell. Inside, 3 fighters sit nose to tail. Bf 109s. 2 with panels removed, 1 intact. The intact one has its cowling closed, its propeller unmarked, its tires clean. Becker approaches it slowly. This aircraft was not damaged in combat. It is here for inspection, which means it is fueled. He checks the cockpit. The battery is connected, the fuel selector is set, the magnetos are live. Someone expected this aircraft to fly again soon. Becker closes his eyes for a moment. This is not theft. This is reassignment. He climbs into the cockpit. The seat fits. The controls are familiar. The engine start procedure is muscle memory. But there is a problem. He hears footsteps outside. Voices. Keys. The hangar door begins to slide open. Becker freezes. If he is discovered here, he will not be arrested. He will be shot. The Luftwaffe does not tolerate desertion, and this will look like desertion. The door opens halfway. Light spills in. A mechanic steps inside, carrying a clipboard. He stops, looks at the aircraft, then looks directly at Becker in the cockpit. Their eyes meet. For a fraction of a second, neither moves. Then Becker reaches for the starter. The mechanic shouts. Becker does not understand the words, but he understands the tone. The inertia starter whines. The engine coughs. The mechanic runs for the door. Becker shoves the throttle forward. The Bf 109 lurches. The hangar fills with noise, smoke, and panic. Becker releases the brakes and aims straight at the opening. The wingtip clears the doorframe by less than a meter. Outside, someone is firing. Tracers streak past the cockpit. Becker does not look back. He pushes the throttle to full. The fighter races across the concrete apron. There is no runway ahead, only grass and darkness. At 1:32 a.m., Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Becker lifts off from a Luftwaffe maintenance base in a fighter he was never authorized to fly. He has no clearance, no orders, no plan beyond the next problem. Behind him, alarms begin to sound. Ahead of him, the night sky opens. Becker retracts the landing gear and climbs into the darkness. The raid has worked. Now he has to survive the consequences. Becker keeps the aircraft low, not because it is safer to fly low, but because it is quieter on radar. At altitude, every German listening station will see a friendly transponder code doing something impossible. At treetop height, the fighter is just another fast-moving shadow in the dark. The Bavarian countryside slides beneath him in fragments. Fields, roads, a river reflecting moonlight. Farmhouses asleep and unaware that a Luftwaffe pilot is escaping his own air force overhead. He trims the aircraft by feel. The Bf 109 vibrates slightly through the stick. Not damage, just imbalance. The engine temperatures stabilize. Oil pressure holds. Whatever failed in his earlier aircraft is not present here. That confirms his suspicion. The crash was not pilot error. It was maintenance fatigue, which means someone will be blamed, and Becker will not be around to accept it. By 2:10 a.m., he is 40 kilometers away from the maintenance complex. That is far enough that local search efforts will be disorganized, far enough that any pursuit aircraft will be launched late, without precise vectors. The Luftwaffe does not scramble interceptors against itself quickly. It assumes internal discipline. Becker intends to exploit that assumption. He turns northwest, not toward his assigned unit, not toward any base where his name is logged. He heads instead toward a satellite airfield he knows only by reputation, a place used for dispersal and emergency landings. Minimal staff, poor records. A place where a fighter arriving late at night might not raise questions until morning. The navigation is crude. No radio, no charts, just compass, moon, and memory. Becker flew over this region dozens of times during training.
He memorized landmarks without realizing he was doing it.
Rivers bend the same way. Rail lines cut through terrain in predictable arcs. Towns glow faintly, even under blackout. At 2:41 a.m., he sees the runway lights. Dim, shielded, temporary. The field is awake, but barely. He makes a shallow approach and lands smoothly, rolling to a stop near the hangars. No one fires at him. That is the most dangerous moment so far, because now questions will be asked. The first man to reach the aircraft is a corporal with a flashlight and a rifle slung loosely over his shoulder. "Welche Einheit?" he asks. Becker answers without hesitation. A unit number that exists, but not here. The corporal nods. He does not check paperwork. He does not call it in. He is cold and tired, and it is nearly morning. Becker shuts down the engine and climbs out. His ankles screams as his weight hits the ground. He hides it. In war, weakness invites inspection. The corporal gestures toward a small office near the hangar. Becker walks that way. Inside, a lieutenant sits behind a desk with a mug of coffee and a stack of forms. He looks up, irritated. "You're early," the lieutenant says. Becker chooses his words carefully. "Unscheduled diversion," he says. "Mechanical issue." The lieutenant rubs his eyes. "Where's your aircraft?" Becker answers calmly, "This is it." The lieutenant frowns. "That tail number is not assigned to you." Becker shrugs. "It is now." The lieutenant stares at him for a long moment. Then he does something unexpected. He laughs. "Every fighter pilot in Germany thinks the paperwork belongs to someone else," he says. "You're lucky you didn't land at a place that cares." He signs the form. "Get some rest. Maintenance will look at the aircraft at first light." Becker salutes and leaves before more questions can form. He does not go to the barracks. He goes back to the aircraft. Becker knows the morning will bring clarity. Maintenance crews will examine the fighter. They will trace its movement. They will realize it took off without authorization. Someone will connect the dots to the crash site. By afternoon, Becker will be arrested, unless he is gone. He climbs back into the cockpit and begins preparing the aircraft again. He checks fuel, still 3/4 full. He checks oil, within limits. He checks the tires, undamaged. The sun is still below the horizon. This is his window. The plan is not elegant. It does not need to be. He will take off again, and this time he will not land at any German field. At 3:28 a.m., the Bf 109 lifts off for the second time in 8 hours. This time, no one sees it. Becker turns west. The front lines are distant, but reachable. He knows the risks. German radar, German night fighters, German flak belts. But he also knows something else. The Germans are not expecting a German aircraft to defect at dawn. Their systems are built to detect enemies, not internal contradictions. He climbs to 1,500 feet, then levels off. At altitude, he is visible. At ground level, he is vulnerable. This middle ground is compromise, and compromise is dangerous. 30 minutes into the flight, he sees searchlights. They probe the sky in slow arcs. Becker drops lower. Tracer fire erupts beneath him, random and distant. He is inside the defensive ring now. Every kilometer west increases the chance that someone recognizes the silhouette and realizes what is happening. Becker adjusts course again, avoids a city, skirts a rail junction. At 4:12 a.m., he crosses the first layer of flak belts. Black bursts bloom ahead of him. The gunners are firing blind. They do not have a radar track. They are firing at noise. Becker dives through the bursts and comes out the other side, shaking but intact. The engine continues to run smoothly. That almost makes him angry. If it had failed earlier, none of this would be happening. At 4:49 a.m., the horizon begins to lighten. Dawn is the enemy now. With light comes identification. Becker needs to cross the front lines before the sky fully opens. He pushes the throttle forward. The Bf 109 accelerates. The ground becomes a blur again. At 5:03 a.m., he sees it. A long scar across the landscape. Trenches, roadblocks, burned vehicles. The Western Front. He descends to treetop level again. If he stays low, Allied radar may miss him. If they see him, they will assume he is hostile. That part of the plan has no solution. At 5:11 a.m., small arms fire rises toward him. Then heavier fire. The Allies are awake, and they are shooting. Becker holds course. He does not weave. He does not climb. He flies straight through. The aircraft shudders as rounds strike the fuselage. One punches through the wing root. Another smashes the canopy frame behind his head. He does not look back. At 5:17 a.m., he crosses into Allied territory. No alarms sound, no fighters appear, just open farmland and the first calm he has felt since the crash. He does not celebrate. He knows he is not finished. Because now, he is flying a German fighter over Allied airfields in daylight. Becker begins looking for a landing site immediately. He does not want a base, he wants a strip. Something improvised, something unimportant. At 5:36 a.m., he finds one. A grass field marked by vehicles and tents. No hardened defenses, no heavy flak. He lowers the landing gear. It deploys cleanly. That feels like mercy. He lines up and lands. The Bf 109 rolls to a stop. Silence. Then shouting. Then rifles. American soldiers sprint toward him, weapons raised. They expect a German pilot. They expect resistance. The canopy slides back. A Luftwaffe officer climbs out, hands raised. He speaks English. "Do not shoot," Becker says. "I am not your enemy." They do not lower their rifles. That takes longer. When Becker finally sits on a crate, wrapped in a blanket, ankles swelling visibly now, an American intelligence officer crouches in front of him. "You're telling me," the officer says slowly, "that you crashed a fighter, stole another one from a German hangar, took off twice without orders, crossed 2 flak belts, flew through our lines, and landed here because you didn't want to fill out paperwork." Becker thinks about it. "That is mostly accurate," he says. The officer exhales. "You know you could have surrendered." "Yes." "And you chose not to." "Yes." "Why?" Becker looks down at his hands. They are shaking now, because the danger is finally over. "Because surrender ends a war on paper," he says. "I was not finished." The officer studies him, then writes something in his notebook. Outside, American mechanics are already circling the Bf 109. They are touching the skin, looking at the engine, arguing quietly about what variant it is. Becker watches them through the tent flap. He recognizes the look, the same one he used to have. Curiosity before judgment. That gives him hope. By noon, Becker is officially a prisoner of war, but he is alive, and the aircraft he stole will be studied, photographed, flown, and eventually disassembled for intelligence. His crash will be written up as mechanical failure. His disappearance will confuse German records for weeks. Somewhere, a clerk will mark him missing. Somewhere else, another clerk will mark the aircraft destroyed. Neither will be correct. Becker leans back and closes his eyes. He has survived not by obeying procedure, but by understanding when procedure stops serving reality, and by acting before the system can correct him. Becker spends the first 2 days in Allied custody answering the same questions in different rooms. Not accusations, curiosity. Every intelligence officer wants to know the same thing. Why did he run? Why not surrender? Why take a fighter? Why take off twice? Becker gives the same answer every time. Because staying meant being absorbed by a system that was already collapsing. Because moving meant choice. The officers write it down, but they don't quite understand it. They're trained to categorize men. Prisoner, defector, asset, liability. Becker fits none of them cleanly. He is a German pilot who did not defect for ideology. He did not bring plans or secrets. He did not arrive waving a flag. He arrived because he refused to stop flying. That makes him difficult and interesting. On the third day, they bring him to the aircraft. The Bf 109 sits on the edge of the strip, roped off, already half dismantled, panels removed, cowling open, the engine exposed like an autopsy. American mechanics swarm it. They argue in low voices. A G6 or a G14? Late war canopy. Fuel injection systems intact. Becker listens. He knows what they're really doing. They're not just studying the aircraft. They're studying him. They want to know if his story holds up. One of the mechanics, older, grease permanently embedded in his knuckles, looks up at Becker. "You start this thing from memory?" he asks. Becker nods. "No checklist?" "No." The mechanic whistles softly. "You Germans build these to be unforgiving." Becker allows himself a small smile. "So do you." The mechanic laughs. That breaks the tension. For the first time since the crash, Becker feels like a pilot again, not a problem. 2 weeks later, Becker is transferred to a formal POW camp. Not punishment. Procedure. He is registered, photographed, assigned a number. The camp is orderly, predictable, boring. That, too, is a system. Becker adapts. He keeps his ankle elevated until the swelling subsides. He exercises daily. He listens more than he talks. Pilots talk in camps. They trade stories. Rumors move faster than guards. Within a month, everyone knows about the fighter. Some exaggerate it. Some simplify it. Some reduce it to myth. Stole a plane. Flew out under fire. Crazy bastard. Becker never corrects them. The details don't matter anymore. What matters is that the story circulates. Because stories are dangerous in captivity, they remind men that systems can be escaped. Back in Germany, Becker's crash file stalls. The engine fragments are recovered from the field. The maintenance report cites overheating, possible manufacturing defect, inconclusive. His disappearance is logged as unaccounted for. The stolen aircraft creates confusion. The maintenance complex insists it never released it. The satellite field insists it never authorized a second takeoff. No one wants to take responsibility, so no one does. The war moves on. The Luftwaffe loses pilots faster than it loses paperwork. By the end of 1943, no one is looking for Karl-Heinz Becker anymore. The Allied intelligence community, however, does not forget him. Because his decision reveals something useful. Not about aircraft, about people. They write reports about stress behavior, about how pilots respond when systems fail, about how training intersects with improvisation. Becker's background as a mechanic becomes a footnote, but an important one. The report notes that pilots with maintenance experience demonstrate lower panic response and higher adaptability under system failure. Someone underlines that sentence. Someone else writes, "Investigate," in the margin. Becker never sees the report, but pieces of his thinking quietly enter doctrine, not credited, just absorbed. In the camp, Becker marks time. The war draws closer. Bombing intensifies. Guards grow quieter. In April 1945, the camp wakes to unfamiliar sounds. Not aircraft, not artillery. Engines, tracked vehicles. The gates open. American soldiers enter. The war for Becker ends without ceremony. No one shakes his hand. No one asks him about the hangar again. He is processed, fed, loaded onto a truck. Another system replaces the last. After the war, Becker is repatriated. Germany is rubble. His hometown is damaged but standing. The workshop where his father worked no longer exists. Becker does not return to aviation. Not immediately. He takes work repairing agricultural engines, tractors, pumps, generators, machines that do what they are told, machines that fail slowly. At night, he dreams of cockpits, of gauges he cannot read, of engines that scream before they die. The dreams fade. Time does its work. Years later, a historian tracks him down. The stolen fighter appears as a footnote in an Allied intelligence archive. A curiosity. German pilot appropriated aircraft under unclear circumstances. The historian wants clarity. Becker listens politely, then corrects one thing. It was not unclear, he says. It was very simple. What was simple? The historian asks. The choice, Becker replies. Stop or move. The historian asks if he regrets it. Becker thinks. No, he says, I regret crashing the first one. The historian laughs, unsure if it's a joke. It isn't. Becker dies quietly in the 1980s. No medals, no ceremonies, no newspaper stories. His name does not appear in books about famous aces or daring escapes. Because his story does not fit comfortably. He was not heroic in the traditional sense. He did not escape captivity. He did not change the war. He simply refused to let a system decide the end of his usefulness. That is the through line. Not the crash, not the stolen aircraft, not the flight through flak. The mindset. When the machine fails, most people wait for instruction. Becker looked at the same failure and asked a different question. What still works? The hangar worked. The engine worked. The runway worked. The rest was paperwork. And paperwork, he knew, could not stop an aircraft once it was moving. For most men, the war ends in a single moment. A surrender, a liberation, a signature on a form. For Becker, it ends the way it was always going to end, quietly, with systems shutting down one by one. In the years after the war, Becker is interviewed twice more, not by journalists, by analysts, men trying to understand why certain people survive when procedure collapses. They are not interested in the stolen aircraft as a spectacle. They are interested in the decision chain. Why didn't he wait for recovery? Why didn't he surrender immediately? Why didn't fear override calculation? Becker answers them patiently. He explains that aircraft failures are rarely isolated events. A mechanical failure triggers an administrative one. An administrative failure triggers a human one. Once that cascade starts, the safest-looking choice is often the one that locks you into the worst outcome. Waiting would have placed him inside a process designed to assign fault, not preserve ability. Surrender would have ended his agency completely. Moving forward, even blindly, kept options alive. The analysts write that down. They don't call it heroism, they call it adaptive behavior under institutional stress. A bloodless phrase, but accurate. The aircraft he stole does not survive long. It is flown a handful of times by Allied test pilots. They note its handling characteristics, its strengths, its weaknesses. They compare it to captured examples from other fields. Then it is dismantled. Its parts are shipped to different facilities. The engine goes one way, the wings another. The cockpit instruments end up in crates with handwritten labels. Eventually, it disappears into the machinery of research. No plaque marks it. No sign explains where it came from. It becomes data. Becker lives a life that does not look remarkable from the outside. He marries, he works, he repairs machines that break in predictable ways. He does not join veterans organizations, he does not attend reunions. When asked about the war, he speaks carefully. He does not embellish. He does not dramatize. He never uses the word raid. He says instead, "I found an aircraft." That distinction matters to him. Late in his life, Becker is asked a question he has heard many times before. "Did you know you were doing something extraordinary?" He thinks about it. "No," he says. "I knew I was doing something necessary." The difference is subtle and important. Extraordinary actions are performed for recognition. Necessary actions are performed because the alternative is unacceptable. This is where the story usually gets simplified, reduced to a headline, a stunt, a daring escape. But that version misses the point. The point is not that a man stole an aircraft. The point is that he understood the system he was inside well enough to know when it stopped serving him, and when it became dangerous to obey. Wartime systems are built for scale. They are not built for edge cases. They assume average behavior, average outcomes, average compliance. When something falls outside that average, the system does not adapt quickly. It applies pressure, paperwork, discipline, delay. For most people, that pressure works. For some, it becomes lethal. Becker recognized that moment, not because he was braver than others, but because he had spent enough time on the other side of machines to know when a process was lying. There is no doctrine that covers what he did. No manual advises pilots to raid their own hangars. No checklist includes appropriate alternative aircraft. And yet, when the situation demanded it, the solution existed, unwritten, unapproved, waiting in plain sight. That is how many real wartime solutions emerge, not from command, not from policy, but from individuals who see the boundary between what is allowed and what is required, and step across it deliberately. If Becker had waited, his story would have ended with a report. If he had surrendered, it would have ended with a number. Instead, it ends with a question, the same one he asked himself that night in the hangar. What still works? The aircraft worked, the runway worked, the engine worked, and that was enough. If stories like this matter to you, stories not about legends, but about human limits, consider subscribing for more quiet histories like this one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next story.